Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Righteous Converts, True Religion. Thank you all for being here with us tonight. And we have really a jam-packed one. You guys that are here are the lucky ones, because tonight's session is quite possibly the most scandalous, the most exciting, the most soap opera-like. Like, if there's something in Jewish history that looks like almost exactly like a soap opera, it is definitely tonight's session. So you are in store for a lot of fun. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for everyone watching with us here on Zoom. Thank you for those who are going to be watching later on Torah Anytime. Thank you for those watching on Facebook and YouTube and all the plethora of places that we have set up for you to watch this session. In your chat box there, I'm going to put the link to the outline. This is the outline for tonight's session if you would like to follow along. And this right here, the second link I'm going to throw in there, is a resource that we will also make reference to a few times. So let me get that in the chat box there. Okay, it's two links, two Google Drive links. The first one is to the outline. The second one is to a family tree that we will use. We'll use a bunch of times. So with no further ado, let's jump on in. Our topic for tonight is Righteous Converts, True Religion. And tonight we're discussing the first convert to Judaism, Ruth, mother of the Messianic Dynasty. Now, that topic in of itself is somewhat debatable. In other words, calling Ruth the first convert, because quite often you'll see others referred to as the first convert. You might see Yisro, aka Jethro, who is referred to as the first convert. But be it as it may, Ruth is definitely the first one we have mentioned to us as a convert who really sticks with Judaism, who sticks with it, and who has a very significant role. There's others, like I said, that we debate. Maybe they converted, maybe they didn't, maybe they stuck with it, maybe they didn't. That's the category that Jethro would fall into. That's the category that Bisia, the adopted mother of Moshe, would fall into. But Ruth is the first one who really gives us a backdrop, a definition, a look to what exactly conversion is. And we're going to see her role in the lineage of the Messianic Dynasty. Now, to understand and to really start the story of where Ruth comes from, we have to follow with the Medrash, with the Medrash and Bereshis Rabbah tells us. It says that I have found my servant David. Where did God find him? In Sodom. In other words, if we want to look at the origins of this family, the family of Ruth, the family of the Messiah, the Messianic family, the Medrash tells us the first place we have to look is in Sodom. Yes, that's Sodom, as in Sodom and Gomorrah, as in the cities that were overturned by the Almighty when, due to their evil deeds. And the Medrash goes on to tell us that because Abraham davened that Sodom should be saved. Now, the city was not saved, but his nephew Lot and his two daughters were in fact saved. And we're going to see that from that family, we're going to see the family of the Messiah will descend. So what's the story at this point? As I was advertised as class today, I was saying that what we're going to discuss is in many ways more scandalous than the most scandalous soap opera. It's more exciting, and because literally anything you would ever have in a soap opera, you have here in this discussion. So the story starts in Sodom. Sodom's destroyed, overturned. We see that before it is overturned, that Lot and his two daughters are saved. Now, that was not Lot's entire family. Lot, in fact, had 4 daughters. 2 daughters were already married, 2 daughters were single. The 2 married daughters opted to stay in Sodom, thinking their father was crazy, and therefore he left with only his 2 single daughters. And we all know what happened to his wife, that his wife turned back to look at the destruction, and because of that was turned into a pillar of salt, and it became the Morton Salt mascot from that point on in her, in history. So that's the beginnings of what happens at the time of Sodom. Now, what happens next is that Lot and his daughters are really Lot's daughters. We don't see that Lot holds this opinion, but Lot's daughters believe that they are the last 2 women alive on the planet and that their father is the last male alive on the planet. Now, let's take a moment here just to get the family tree. This was not included on the family tree I gave you, but Lot was Abraham's nephew. Lot was the son of Haran, Abraham's brother, and the sister of Sarah, as in Sarah Menu. That was who Lot was. So he had a pretty good pedigree here. So Lot's daughters believe that they're the last two human beings alive on the planet. So they say, we have a problem here. We have to procreate because it's just us and dad. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to get dad drunk, and I am going to be with dad tonight, and then we're going to get dad drunk again tomorrow night, and you will be with him tomorrow night, and then hopefully we will become impregnated, and we will be able to procreate and continue the sustenance of the world in that way. So that's exactly how it played out. They get him drunk. The older daughter's with Lot one night. They get him drunk the next night. The younger daughter's with Lot the next night. And both of them become pregnant from the union with their father. One has a son that she names Ben Ami, which means son of my nation. And one has a son that she names Moav, which means from dad. That's a rough name to have, like ancestral child or a child of incest. That's what Moab means. And that's really what Ben Ami means too, but it's slightly more subtle. Ben Ami becomes known as Ammon, and Moab is Moab. Now, that's the origins of these two nations. These two nations rear their ugly face, more Moab than Ammon, but Ammon's definitely there too. They rear their ugly face many, many times in Jewish history. If we now look at our family tree that I submitted to you through the link there, I'm going to bring it up here on the screen share so we can look at it together. Okay, so we have this is the family tree. This is the family tree of the Messianic Dynasty. So let's make it a little bit bigger here. 1 second. Here we go. There we go. Okay, so we scroll to the top over here. We have Lot and his daughters, and they give birth to, this family tree only has two, but Moab and Ammon was the other one. Now, further on, there is a king by the name of Tzipor that comes from Moab, and then Balak. Now, if you know your biblical stories, you know Balak is the one who wants to curse the Jewish people, who hires the evil prophet Bilam to do his task, and they are unsuccessful. But then they wage a war against the Jewish people, and there's a lot of bloodshed at that point. Fast forward in history, there's another king that descends from Moab by the name of Eglon. Eglon, if you know the book of Judges, Eglon was one of the tormentors of the Jewish people at the time of Ehud ben Gera, the second of the Shoftim, the second of the rulers of the judges, and Ehud is able to end him and end his torment of the Jewish people. But you basically have a long line of anti-Semites. That's essentially what you have over here from Moab. You have a long line of kings and people who really torment the Jewish people and cause a lot of trouble for the Jewish people. And that's our cousins, right? That's right there from Lot, from Abraham's nephew, from Sarah's brother. That is who they are. That is the ancestral relationship that he has with his daughters, and that's what descends from that. Okay, we're gonna come back to them in a minute. I'm just putting both these links in the chat again for people who are just showing up, but we will come back to this family tree again momentarily. And you have it there in the link if you want to look at it again closer. Okay, so says the Medrash, that's the first place we have to look for the family of the Messiah. We look at Lot and his daughters. That's like building block 1 in this family. Building block 2 actually comes from last week's Parsha, right? Last week's Parsha, we had the story of Yehuda and Tamar. Now, what's the story of Yehuda and Tamar? Yehuda is the fourth child of Leah and Yaakov, and he is the one who gets blamed for selling Joseph into slavery. Why does he get blamed? Because it was his idea, right? It's his idea. They see how much it upsets. They see how much it upsets their father, and therefore they blame Yehuda, and he, so to speak, is temporarily kicked out of the family. While he is kicked out of the family, he goes to some distant land, and he marries the daughter of a person named Shua, and he has 2 sons. Those 2 sons are Er and Onan. Now, Er marries a lady by the name of Tamar, and dies without children. Now, the reason he dies without children, the Torah tells us, is because he was not such a righteous dude. He didn't want to mess up his wife's beauty and thought that it could get messed up through pregnancy. I've heard such things happen, not to my wife or anyone I know, but I've heard, women can put on some weight and their complexion can get all out of whack and whatever it is. And Er did not want his wife Tamar's beauty to be diminished by becoming pregnant, so he made sure not to procreate when he was together with his wife. Er is punished with death, and at that point, we see the first instance of Yibum. Now, Yibum is a concept in the Torah that if a woman becomes widowed, childless, before she can marry out into the outside world, outside of the family, the first right of refusal, so to speak, is to her brother's family, usually the next oldest brother or some other next of kin. And this is the first representation of Yibum we see in Jewish history, the first one we know about. Now, Yibum is the Hebrew word. The English word that is attributed to Yibum is levirate marriage. I assume that nobody in this class has any clue what levirate marriage means, so therefore we will stick to the word yibum. Levirate marriage, by the way, it's from Latin. It means brother marriage, but we don't know what it means, so we'll stick to the Hebrew word yibum. So Onan, Er's brother, performs yibum. He marries Tamar, and he has other, he's also not such a righteous dude. His issue is he doesn't like the concept of yibum. He doesn't want to keep his brother's name alive, which is the whole point of Yibum. So he also makes sure that when he is together with Tamar, that they do not procreate and do not have any children. And sure enough, he has the same demise as Er. He is also struck down by the Almighty. So now Tamar has gone through two husbands now, two brothers, Er and Onan, they're both dead. Yehuda, the father-in-law, says, okay, my two sons have died. I have another son, Shelah. He's not old enough to get married yet. Go wait in your father's house as a widow, and when he becomes of age, I will give you Shelah to marry. That's what Yehuda says to Tamar. And, time plays on, time goes on, and Tamar notices that Shelah has come of age, yet, for whatever reason, Yehuda has not given Shelah to her as a husband to perform Yibum, and she's not happy. We now see again the same exact trait, the same exact activity, the same exact action that we saw with Lot and his daughters, we see with Tamar. In other words, what? We see that in Jewish history, there's a concept of women have what's called a bina yesera, have a more innate understanding of what needs to happen in the world. We see this with our imahos, with the matriarchs, and we saw it first with Lot and his daughters. The Lot and his daughters knew that somehow they had to have progeny from their father, and so they took matters into their own hands to make it happen. Tamar does the same exact thing. What does Tamar do? She dresses herself up as a prostitute. She sits after, now, by the way, at this point, we're told that Yehuda's wife has also died. Yehuda's in just coming out of the Veilus, just coming out of mourning for his wife. So he's lost his wife, lost his two sons. What does Tamar do? She dresses up as a prostitute, and she attempts to lure in her father-in-law. Because, again, she knows that she's supposed to have progeny from Yehuda, and Yehuda's not letting it happen through Shelah, so she takes matters into her own hands. Dressed up as a prostitute, and there's a whole kind of discussion. How did he not realize it was his daughter-in-law? And what the Midrashim tell us is she was such a modest woman that the whole time she was married to Er and Onan, to Yehuda's two children, Yehuda never saw her face. She always wore a veil. She was always very modest. She wore a burqa, I guess. I don't know what it was, but she made sure to always hide her face. So therefore, Yehuda did not know it was his daughter-in-law. He and the Medrash tells us something fascinating, because again, who is Yehuda? There's not some shmendrik on the street who's walking down Hollywood Boulevard and sees a pretty woman. That's not what's going on over here. This is Yehuda. This is the fourth child of Yaakov and Leah. This is one of the Shiftei Ka, one of the progenitors of the 12 tribes of Yisrael, the 12 tribes of the Jewish people. And not only that, when we look at our name today as Jews, we are named after Yehuda because most of us probably descend from the tribe of Yehuda. So this is like, this is no slouch over here. This is a very righteous individual. So as often happens when the verses of the Torah leave a lot to be desired in understanding, the Midrashim or the Talmud or the oral Torah has to come in to give us an explanation, and that's exactly what happens over here. The Medrash again in Bereshis Rabbah tells us that Yehuda saw the prostitute, not knowing it was Tamar, on the side of the street, and he was going to keep going. He had no intent. He was not looking for a prostitute. He had no intention to spend time with Tamar. But the Holy One, blessed be He, dispatched the angel of lust. There's angels for everything, to waylay him. The angel said, Yehuda, where are you going? From where will kings arise? From where will great men arise? Then he, Yehuda, turned to her by the way. He was coerced against his good sense. In other words, Yehuda wasn't looking for this. But again, Tamar had to intercede. And not only that, but the angel had to come in. And there's another medrash that says the angel grabs Yehuda by the scruff of his neck and says, you can't pass this by because this is where the king of Israel is going to come from. And the relationship happens. Tamar does not reveal herself at all. In fact, 3 months later, when it becomes known that she is pregnant, Yehuda orders her to be taken out to death because he assumes that she was adulterous because she was still connected to the family. And therefore, he assumes she got pregnant through some sort of adulterous relationship. And at the time, Tamar does not, again, in her modesty, does not reveal what happened with Yehuda. She says, oh, well, whoever signet ring this is and whoever staff this is the man who got me pregnant. Yehuda right away recognizes it as his own. And he says, she's more righteous than me. I get it now. That I also know prophetically that I was supposed to have progeny from her. I was preventing it from happening. She took matters into her own hands. She is more righteous than me. Let her live. And he was never with her again, by the way. He was never with her again. She had twin children. We always have, these children come in packs of twos. It's kind of like a funny thing in Jewish history. Never really thought about it much, why it's always in twos, because there's always one that's more significant than the other, and this is a case in point. Because she has two children. One's name is Zerach, and one's name is Peretz. Okay, that's piece two of the Messianic family. So we have Lot and his daughters, this ancestral relationship, and now we have this daughter-in-law who seduces her father to be able to perform yibum in a not so classical way, an unconventional way, and that's step number 2 of the family of Messiah. And these are the families that Ruth and her, Ruth, right? Ruth, as she's called in English, Ruth, as she's called in Sephardic Hebrew, and Ruth, as I call her in Ashkenazi Hebrew. These are the backdrops. These are the antecedents of the families of Ruth and her husband, Boaz. On one side, we're going to have Lot and his daughter, and on the other side, we have Yehuda and Tamar. These are the great-great-grandfathers and grandmothers of this family. Okay, let me pause now and see if there's any questions. Yes, it is definitely a soap opera. There's no other way to call it but a soap opera. Any other questions about anything we've said so far? Any points of clarity needed? No, we're all good? Okay, so let's keep rocking and rolling. Now let's get into the story of Ruth. I'm going to jump back to our family tree for a moment. Again, you can bring it up through the link, or you can look at it here through the screen share. So far in the story, we have, let me get the fancy thing out here, 1 second. Here we go. Okay, so far we have Lot and his daughters. And that gives us this line, this Moabite line, all the way down to Ruth, where we're going to be here in a moment. Over here, we had Yehuda's family, right? And Tamar, there's Tamar, Yehuda, and that gives way to Peretz, to Chetzron, to Ram, to Aminadab, to Nakshon, to Salma, and now let me back up a little bit here. We're really focused on the family of Nakshon. Now this is, you probably know the name Nakshon. Nakshon is very famous in Jewish history. Yes, this is the same Nakshon ben Aminadav, the one who was the first one to walk into the sea. He is the Nasi, he's the prince of the tribe of Yehuda, and he is the father of 4 sons that we know of. One is nameless. We'll call him father of Naomi. That's like my wife's name, and I always refer, I don't like to mention her father's name. So no, I'm just kidding. So one is father of Naomi, one is Elimelech, one is Salma or Salmon, and one is Tov. These are the 4 sons of Nakshon ben Aminadav, and they are the ones that our story is about tonight. So when you talk about the story of Ruth, many people don't realize that that's really the family of the most famous Nakshon ben Aminadav. Now, that also is really fascinating as we jump into the story, because we see that we're not dealing with the family of lightweights over here. We're dealing with the family of the prince of the tribe of Judah. That's who we're dealing with over here. So what happens? We're at the time of the Shoftim, again, the time of the judges. We're towards the end, where shortly before we're going to have the kingship actually started, and a famine hits the land of Israel. Now, at that point, the Shofet, the leader of the Jewish people, was Boaz, who is the son of Salma, and the nephew of Elimelech. Elimelech could have been the Shofet. Now, the Shofet was interesting. The Shofet is the judges. The judges were the interesting positions that is kind of unclear. It's kind of unclear how they became the leaders of the Jewish people. According to one opinion in the Talmud, they were appointed by prophets. According to another one, they were appointed by the Sanhedrin. And according to another opinion, they were just the ones who rose to the top, right, and led the Jewish people. Elimelech, coming from the family of Nakshon, and being older than Boaz, who we'll see becomes a Shofet, that Elimelech could have been the Shofet. But he didn't want to deal with the challenges of the famine. So he flees the land of Israel. And where does he go? He goes to the land of Moab. Okay, not such a good place to go. Now, Hippik is a righteous guy from a righteous family, and he goes to the country of Moab, who we saw are kind of like the arch enemies of the Jewish people in many ways. And his nephew, Boaz, becomes a Shofet. Now, what's interesting is if we look in the book of Judges, he's not called Boaz over there. He's called Ivson. But Ivson is Boaz. In the book of Ruth, he's called Boaz. In the book of Judges, he's called Ivson. Now, there's one other point I forgot to tell you about this wonderful tribe of Moab, this kingdom of Moab, our cousins over here, is that when the Jewish people are wandering through the desert, at one point they are not treated so nicely by the nations of Ammon and Moab. Really a couple points. We mentioned Bilam and Balak. There's another point where they try and sabotage the Jewish people. There's another point where they don't let the Jewish people pass through their land. They do not treat the Jewish people too nicely at any interaction with them. So a law is passed about them. The law that is passed about the Moabites and the Ammonites and the nation of Ammon is Lo Yavo B'Kol Yisrael, which means that they cannot marry into the Jewish people. Now, they're the only nation that get that status. What does that mean, they can't marry into the Jewish people? That means that they can convert to Judaism, but they don't lose their status of being Moabites. They would be Jewish, but they cannot marry any other Jew other than descendants of Moabites. They're allowed to convert, but they can't officially come into the Jewish people. That is a law that is given to the nation of Moab, which begs the question, because here we're going to have this situation where, again, famine hits the land of Israel. Elimelech does not want to deal with it. He flees the land of Israel with his wife, whose name is Naomi, and his 2 sons, whose names are Machlon and Kilion. Again, if you're still looking at our family tree over here, 1 second. Right. Again, we got Elimelech. He's the one who we're talking about over here. His wife Naomi, and their 2 sons Machlon and Kilion. That's the family over here. So they don't want to deal with the famine in the land of Israel. They go to Moab, and while they're in the land of Moab, Machlon and Kilion find themselves some nice Moabite princesses. What? Yes, they marry Moabite princesses. How do they do that? I mean, the questions are multiple. First of all, again, these are descendants from Nakshon. What are they doing marrying non-Jewish women? That's the first question we have to ask, right? This is the session. The topic for the series is righteous converts. So how are they marrying non-Jewish women? And it's a whole discussion as to when their wives, who were Ruth and Orpah, were their names, Ruth and Orpah. So a discussion as to when they converted. Now, we're going to go, just because I believe it's the easiest to understand, we're going to go with the approach they did convert before they married Machlon and Kilion. Chas v'shalom, God forbid to say that Machlon and Kilion, the sons of Elimelech and Naomi, would have married non-Jewish Moabite women. So we'll say that they converted, but the conversion is suspect because it's unclear why they were marrying, like that maybe Ruth and Orpah are marrying for ulterior motives. They want to marry into this royal Jewish family. So the conversion is suspect. And with that, we'll understand a later story. We'll keep that tidbit of knowledge for a moment. So fine, they converted, but they're Moabites. I just told you that a Jew is not allowed to marry a Moabite, even if they do convert. So how is it that Machlon and Kilion marry Moabite women? Enters now a big halachic discussion that comes up many times. We're going to see it comes up a few times in tonight's discussion, a few times in Jewish history, and it's the question of what we call Moavi velo Moavis. In other words, going back to the decree against the Moabites, when they were not hospitable, when they attacked the Jewish people, who were the guilty culprits? It wasn't the Moabite women. They were at home taking care of the family, whatever. They weren't fighting the war for sure. It was the Moabite men. So who is the decree on? Is it on all people of Moabite descendancy, or is it just the Moabite men? And this question popped up a number of times in Jewish history, as we'll see. Now, the question as it comes up is Moavi v'lo Moavis or Moavi v'Moavis? That can you not marry a Moabite man and a Moabite female, or just not a Moabite man? Elimelech was obviously of the opinion that it did not apply to Moabite women. So therefore, he marries his two sons to two Moabite women who are sisters themselves, who convert to Judaism, and themselves are descendants of the Moabite royalty. Ruth and Orpah are the granddaughters of Eglon, who we mentioned a moment ago, the great-great-granddaughters of Balak, of Tzipor, going all the way back to Lot and his daughters. That's who Ruth is. That's her antecedents. Okay? So that gives you a little bit of the background to our family over here. Okay, so Avimelech doesn't want to deal with famine, and it's a mistake. It's not right, and he's blamed for it. And that's why he's going to die, and his two sons are going to die. In the land of Moab, where they went to avoid the famine, because they didn't want to deal with all the famine and the poor and the sustenance of the poor. They didn't want any New Deal programs. They didn't want any welfare. They wanted to get away from it all. But the joke is going to be on them, so to speak, and we're going to see that they come to their demise in Moab, and therefore Naomi is left without a husband, without sons, and with two daughter-in-laws, and basically destitute, because whatever wealth they had was completely lost when they were in Moab. So Naomi says, okay, I'm a widow, I'm penniless, I'm sonless, I'm going back to the land of Israel, I might as well, because at least there, like, I can rely on the charity that my husband left the country because he didn't want to participate in. And that's what she does. Naomi begins her trip to go back to the land of Israel, and says to her two Moabite daughter-in-laws, it says, girls, you're still young, pretty, you have your whole life ahead of you. Stay here. You're royalty here. I'm sure your father will take you back into his house. I'm sure you can have a blessed life. Don't come back to the land of Israel with me. Who knows who you're going to marry? Sure, my husband Avimelech was of the opinion that Moabite women were okay, but there's still a lot of people in Israel who will think the Moabite women are not okay. So I don't know who you're going to marry if you come back with me. I don't know what's going to happen. Stay here. Now, the big question at this point that pops up is, what was Naomi doing? If we go with the opinion that Ruth and Orpah convert to Judaism before they marry Machlon and Kilion, what is Naomi doing? Say, oh, don't be Jewish anymore. Give it all up. You can't do that. Once you convert, you're a convert forever. So it goes back to our approach that they were suspected converts. They're suspected converts. In other words, it was suspected that they converted for ulterior motives. And the question is, when somebody converts for ulterior motives, like for marriage, like we discussed last week, or for money, or to be, because it's so great to be a Jew, then they are suspect. And if they're the reason they are suspect is proven to be true, then retroactively they are not kosher converts. They go back to being Gentiles. And that's essentially what Naomi was doing. Naomi was pressing the issue. She was trying to say, are they sincere? Or are they not sincere? And initially, both Ruth and Orpah do not renege. They stick with Naomi. And they say back to their mother, they say, we're going to stick with you. And then Naomi again says, no, stay here. And they raise their voices and they weep. And Orpah says, you know what? I'm going to stay here. But Ruth, in the very faithful words, Naomi says one more time, look, your sister-in-law has returned to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth says, do not urge me to leave you, to turn back from following you. For where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people are my people, and your God is my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may Hashem do to me, and so may he do more, if anything but death separate me from you. The famous words where Ruth shows that she is faithful and connected to Naomi, and she is going to stay Jewish. It's interesting. What happens to Orpah? Orpah, we see, was this close, right? Initially, Naomi says, stay. Orpah says, no, I'm with you. 1, 2 times. On the third time, she says, no, I'm staying. What happens to her? Well, you would think if she's that close to being a Ruth, if she's that close to being a Ruth, then she must have remained a pretty good Moabite woman. The Medrash tells us the opposite. It says the night that Orpah left Naomi, she encountered 100 men from 100 different nations, and she had relations with each and every single one of them, and she even had a relationship with a dog that night. So she went from being like a very, very, very holy, like almost there, and then snaps the other direction. What's up with that? So in truth, we see this happen quite often. You see that the Jews do this after the golden calf, and you see quite often this happens with people throughout the world, and especially throughout Jewish history. I like to refer to this as Anakin Skywalker syndrome. For those of you who are into Star Wars and saw the prequels, I happen to like the prequels. A lot of people didn't like them, but I'll tell you that for those of you who didn't see them, the quick story about how Anakin Skywalker becomes Darth Vader. So Anakin was an honorary member of the Jedi Council. He was there as Chancellor Palpatine's representative, and he is actually the one who exposes to the Jedi Council that Palpatine is in fact a Sith. He's in fact a bad guy, and Mace Windu takes matters into his own hands to go after Palpatine to kill him, to do away with the Sith. Now, poor Anakin had already kind of fallen under the spell of Palpatine, because Palpatine had played with his mind, because he told him like prophetically that his wife Padme was going to die in childbirth, but he had the secret to save her. So we have a moment there where, again, remember, Anakin turned in Palpatine. He's the one who got Mace Windu, played wonderfully by Samuel Jackson, to go after Palpatine. Mace Windu is killing Palpatine. He's in the process. That whole scene, if you saw the movie, where Palpatine is trying to strike him with that lightning from his hands, and Windu has his lightsaber, is bouncing it back on Palpatine, and Palpatine that's where his face gets all burnt up, and he's dying, and he's almost dead. And then Anakin, through his struggle, says, and they know he has a secret to saving my wife. And he cuts off Mace Windu's hand. Mace Windu's hand flies away. Palpatine gets that last spark. Mace Windu falls to his death. And what happens next? Remember, Anakin Skywalker was a Jedi Knight. Remember, he's the one who turned Palpatine in. He was together with Mace Windu to try and subdue Palpatine. What does he do at that moment? He says, Palpatine, I'm your ardent servant. I am now a Sith. I'm going to the dark side. I'm sticking with you. And Palpatine comes up. No longer should you be known as Anakin Skywalker. You're now known as Darth Vader. What happened? A minute ago, he's a Jedi Knight. Now he's Darth Vader? The answer is yes, because that's what happens so often when people are so close to lahavdil, to holiness, to such a high level, and they give it up. This lesson is taught to us in a beautiful way by Rav Yehuda Levi in the Kuzari. he explains to us that there are 5 levels of creation. There's a domem, sumeach, chaim, medaber, and Yisrael. Domem means inanimate objects. Sumeach means living objects like plants, vegetation. Chaim means animals. Medaber means human beings. And then Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people. These are the 5 levels of creation. Explains the Brisker Rav that when a piece of vegetation ceases to be a plant, when it dies, it doesn't become a rock. It does not become an inanimate object. So too, when an animal ceases to be an animal dies, it does not become a plant. It does not become a rock. It becomes nothing. When a human ceases to become a human, it doesn't become an animal, although many humans never leave being an animal in the first place, but they don't go to become an animal. They become nothing, dust of the earth. They decompose down to nothing. So too, when a Jew stops being a Jew, says the Brisker Rav, they don't just become a non-Jew. They don't just become a human being, they become nothing. Just like when the human being stops being a human being, it becomes nothing. And the animal stops being an animal, it becomes nothing. And the plant stops being a plant, it becomes nothing. So too, when a Jew stops being a Jew, it becomes nothing. And that's what we see what happens with Orpah. That here she was this close. She was a Jew. She was right there. She decides to give it up. She doesn't just now go to become over here. She goes completely in the opposite direction, sleeps with every man who comes her way. And that night, she becomes pregnant with her child, Goliath, or as we call him in English, Goliath, who we know will have the great struggle eventually with his cousin, King David. That's Orpah. We just figured we'd cover her because I said we're going to get the soap opera tonight. That's her and her life. Back to Ruth. Ruth sticks with Naomi, goes back to the land of Israel, destitute, subject to poverty, subject to only be sustained by the laws, by the different ways that as Jews were commanded to take care of the poor and the destitute. Now, at this point, we could ask another question. Naomi comes back to the land of Israel, destitute. Again, if you look back at your family tree for a minute, Boaz is her, depending on which way we go in the family, it's either her first cousin, her first cousin, no matter which way you cut it, actually. Her first cousin is the Shofet. Her first cousin is the leader of the Jewish people. So why doesn't she just go to Boaz and say, hey, we fell in rough times. I'm back. Can you help me out? So the answer that the Midrashim give is she was embarrassed. She was embarrassed. Here, her husband, thwarted his responsibilities, left the country, left it all to Boaz. Boaz keeps the country going. She's embarrassed. She doesn't want to come and ask for familial help in this situation. So they subject themselves to what's called lekach, shikach, and peya. Now, this is through the agricultural laws that apply to taking care of the poor, that when a farmer brings in his crop, there's a certain amount of the field that's left for the poor. There's the corners are left, anything that's dropped is left, and anything that's forgotten is left for the poor. So Naomi and Ruth sustain themselves in this way, and they actually go to the field of Boaz and they start collecting the lekach, shikach, and peya to be sustained. While they are in the field, Boaz takes notice of Ruth. Now, again, just while we're painting out the weird situations a little bit here, Boaz is probably about double Ruth's age at this point. Ruth is not even 40 yet. Boaz is over 80. Big age discrepancy. But Boaz takes notice of Ruth and asks, who is that lady who seems so modest? And he's told that this is the daughter-in-law of Naomi, your cousin, who's come back from the land of Moab. Naomi, again, a woman noticing that something's got to happen here. She becomes innately aware that Boaz has taken an interest in her daughter-in-law, Ruth, and she says, get close to Boaz. He's taken interest in you. Maybe he'll marry you and perform yibum so that you can go on and be married and have children. And what she does, again, talking about the crazy stories of the soap opera, that night she goes into Boaz's house, again, twice her age. She climbs into Boaz's bed. Boaz says, who's there? And she says, it's me, Ruth. It's Ruth, the girl you noticed out in the field. He says, oh, hi, how you doing? Right? And he says, and again, when Midrash tells us what happens over here, he also realizes that he is supposed to have progeny from her and that he is supposed to perform yibum. But he says, one second, we have a problem. I am not really the next of kin. There might be somebody who would have the right of Yibum before me. Let's settle the halachic issue, and then we'll do Yibum. So again, the Medrash tells us that Boaz showed tremendous restraint that night, that he had that same desire like Yehuda. He wanted to be with Ruth, but he is not with her the whole night. The next morning, they go to Tov, who's one of the other 4 children of Nakshon ben Aminadav, and Megillas Rus. That's where we know this whole story from Megillas Rus in the book of Rus. He's referred to as Ploni Almoni, which means so-and-so in Hebrew, but we're told in the Medrash his name is Tov. And Boaz thinks he's really the next of kin because he was Elimelech's brother. Boaz is only Elimelech's nephew. And what Boaz does is he buys the entire right to the estate of Elimelech from Tov. So that he makes sure that anything that is possibly Elimelech's is now his, and now he can perform Yibum with Ruth. Again, twice her age. That night they're together. Ruth becomes pregnant, and Boaz dies. So again, all these stories so far, Lot and his daughters, Yehuda and Tamar, Ruth and Boaz, it's a one-night stand, right? There's not these great love affairs. There's a one relationship that leads to the progeny that eventually becomes the line of the Messiah. And Ruth, in fact, becomes pregnant. Ruth has a child by the name of Oved. Oved has a child by the name of Yishai. And now we'll go to Yishai, the grandson of Boaz and Ruth. What's the scandalous story that happens with Yishai? Yishai marries a lady by the name of Nitzeves and has 8 children, has 8 sons. Now, that same question that we mentioned before, that I said pops up a bunch of times in Jewish history, it pops up again in the life of Yishai. That question of Moavi velo Moavis, or Moavi v'Moavis. The prohibition of marrying a Moabite, does it just apply to male Moabites, or does it even apply to female Moabites? Now, what does that have to do with Yishai? Well, Yishai is the grandson of Ruth, who was a Moabite. So therefore, if Moabites are not allowed to marry into the Jewish people, therefore, Yishai would not have Boaz's status, but would have the status of being a Moabite like his grandmother Ruth. Okay? So this question surfaces again. It becomes a big deal. After the 6th child is born, Yishai says, you know what, this is getting rough over here. This big question about if we're allowed to marry Moabites, not allowed to marry Moabites. In other words, he says to his wife, Nitzeves, I'm not sure you're allowed to be married to me because I might have the status of being a Moabite because my grandmother's a Moabite. So you know what? I'm separating from you. And we'll figure it out later. Now, again, this is now going to be the 4th time a woman is going to take matters into her own hands. And we'll see in a moment how that happens. As time plays on, we see that eventually Shmuel the prophet, Shmuel Hanavi, is given the directive from the Almighty to anoint the next king of Israel from the family of Yishai. And he goes to Yishai and he says, convene a meal and invite all your sons. And Shmuel, Samuel the prophet, asked to be introduced to all of the sons of Yishai because he says the next king of Israel is going to come from your sons. So present all your sons to me. So Yishai first brings out his oldest son, Eliav, and the Almighty says, this is not the one that I've chosen. And then he brings out his next son, Aminadav, and he goes on down through sons 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, goes through all his sons. And each time the Almighty prophetically says through the prophet Samuel, says, not this one, not this one, not this one, not this one. At which point the prophet Samuel says, so Jesse presents his 7 sons to Samuel, but Samuel says, Jesse, Hashem has not chosen these. So God said, give me all your sons. None of them are the one that Hashem has chosen to be the next king. So are you sure these are all your sons? To which Yishai says, well, actually, there's another one. He's the younger one. He's out tending the sheep. And so Samuel says, bring him here. And they bring him in. And sure enough, he's a ruddy, fair-eyed, pleasant-looking boy. And Hashem says to Samuel, arise and anoint him, for this is he. And Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him from among his brothers. And the Spirit of Hashem passed over David from that day on. That ruddy little child was David, was King David. Now, there's a bunch of questions we can ask on this story. If the prophet tells you to bring me all your sons, because it is going to be from your sons the next king of Israel is going to arise, and I'm here to anoint him, wouldn't you listen to the prophet and bring all your sons? What kind of game is Yishai playing over here? And not only that, but he says, yeah, you sure don't have any other kids? He says, well, actually, maybe, yeah, there's this like other one out there, maybe. So what happens? Going back to rewind before David was born. Yishai separates from his wife, Nitzevis. But again, Nitzevis, like Ruth before her, and like Tamar before her, and like Lot's daughters before her, says, I have to take matters into my own hands because I know there's another child that needs to come from me and Yishai. So the Medrash tells us, actually the Chidah tells us, that Yishai, at the time they separated from his wife, he took one of his maidservants as a wife, because if he was a Moabite by descendant, he could marry a maidservant, even though he couldn't marry a regular old Jew. So Mrs. Yishai over here, Nitzevis, makes a deal with the maidservant, says, tonight, instead of you going in with my husband, who's separating from me because his own mishigas, from not knowing, he thinks I know the halacha, I'm going to go in and pretend I'm you, and we'll see what happens. She goes in, she's with her husband who had separated from her that night, and sure enough, 3 months later, she becomes pregnant, and the same story like Yehuda and Tamar. Yishai thinks his wife was adulterous. And what is the result of a adulterous relationship? If a married woman becomes pregnant by someone other than her husband, that child is what we call a mamzer. That child is what we call a bastard child. So Yishai thought, because again, Nitzevis, like Tamar, did not reveal what happened, which again, a bunch of questions over here, but just getting the general theme out here. Yishai thought that David was not his son and was a mamzer. And that's why he was like the outcast of the brothers. So that when the prophet comes and says, where's all your kids? He doesn't include David, and David's the outcast. He's treated as the outcast. And it's only when the prophet pushes and says, like, maybe his kid, I think he's a mamzer, I don't know, but bring him in. And that's the one that ends up being the Melak. That's the one that ends up being the king. So there's a fascinating Gemara, a fascinating piece of Talmud in Masechta Pesachim, page Kuf Yud Tes Aleph, page 119a, that expounds upon the verses of Hallel. We're right now in the midst of Hanukkah. Tonight is not only Hanukkah, but it's Rosh Chodesh, so we're going to say Hallel tomorrow for two reasons, for Hanukkah and Rosh Chodesh. And in Hallel, we say 4 verses that the Talmud tells us exactly what point in history those verses were said and who said them. The verses are I will give thanks to you for you have answered me. Says the Talmud, that's David speaking. The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief keystone. That was Yishai. That this is the Lord's doing. It's marvelous in our eyes. That was the brothers. And this is the day which the Lord created us. May us rejoice and be glad in it. That was Samuel. That's what the Talmud says in a very cryptic statement. Now that we know the story I just told you, we know exactly at what point in history that piece of Talmud was talking about. Because here, the family had cast David away. He was the outcast of the family. He was not the one that they thought would be anointed king of Israel. And when it happens, here, the one that was totally downtrodden and disrespected and treated terribly by his family, what does he say? I give thanks to you, Hashem, for you have answered me. You've raised me up. And Yishai says, The stone that was cast away, the one that we all thought was a mamzer, he's now the leader. And the brothers say, Me'ez Hashem, this has to come from the Almighty. Such a thing can only come from the Almighty. And Shmuel says, let's now rejoice because we have the next king of Israel anointed. And that's how David becomes anointed king of Israel. From very inauspicious antecedents. On one side of the family, we have Lot and his daughters and that ancestral relationship, and going down to Ruth and the question of if she can really marry into the Jewish people and her situation with Boaz. On the other side, we have Yehuda and Tamar and that strange relationship, going down to Boaz with Ruth, and eventually they are the grandparents, the great-grandparents of David, who himself comes under shrouded situation of being suspected of being a mamzer from an adulterous relationship, but yet he is the king of Israel. And in truth, it doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop there, because David's going to have many wives. One of those wives is a lady by the name of Bathsheba. Now, Bathsheba comes to us in a very, very interesting way. It really is a class unto itself, so I'm just going to cover it kind of quickly. Bathsheba, at the time when David takes notice of her, is married at that point to Uriah Hachiti. Uriah was a convert from the country of Chiti, and again, like Ruth and Orpah, it was a suspected conversion. Why? Because in the confrontation between David and his cousin Goliath, Uriah is the swordsman, the shieldsman for Goliath, and he helps David after he knocks him with a slingshot to decapitate Goliath. Now, Uriah does it on condition that that David will marry him off to a Jewish girl. So the Medrash says, David, you're just like, you treat Jewish women like they're just, you can just use them for your war efforts over here. You're just willing to give away a Jewish girl to someone who wants to convert to help you in war. We'll give him a Jewish girl. We'll give him your Jewish girl. So Bathsheba is the one who is married off to Uriah Hiti. So again, step number one that makes this story interesting is it's not clear if Uriah was a kosher convert or not. Number two, how old is Bathsheba when she is married to Uriah? She is 3 years old. How old is her father? He is 12 years old, 12 and a half years old. Okay, we're getting really strange here, Rabbi. Yeah, that's what it plays out through a whole way of looking in the Gemara and adding up how old everybody was. So if Bathsheba is about 3 years old when she marries Uriah, she's too young to get married. She's not a bas mitzvah yet. So how is it that a child who's younger than bas mitzvah can be married off? Well, she can be married off by her father. It's a special relationship where children can be married off young, and then they go ahead to their husband's house, and when they become of age and they become bar mitzvah, they can decide that they don't really want to be married to him, and then they leave. That's called miyun. So it's a betrothal, and then miyun when they become bas mitzvah later. Her father, whose name was Eliam, was only 12. He wasn't even bar mitzvahed yet. So here, her marriage is only rabbinical based on this concept of being able to be married off by her father, and it's doubly rabbinical because her father's only 12. And the guy they're doubly rabbinically marrying her off to is a question if he's even Jewish, which is why they had to find such a weird marriage relationship. Now, that's the beginning of this relationship, right? David takes notice of Bathsheba, who's married through this double rabbinical marriage to a quasi maybe Jew, maybe not Jew. And again, the Medrash, the angels kick in and say, you gotta, this is yours. The Messiah is going to come from here. And he calls her over. He's with her that night, and then she becomes pregnant. And David has a whole issue on what to do about Uriah. He initially tries to cover it up to make it look like Uriah was the father. Then he sends Uriah off to war. A whole discussion also in the Talmud to say that David and Melak Loche, they really didn't do anything wrong because before the soldiers of David went to war, they all gave their wives a get. Okay, a lot of discussion over here to justify what David did. But bottom line is, it's not a good, it wasn't a great thing in many ways. Yet, he marries her. She becomes pregnant. The child dies. They are together again in a totally legal way. And from that union, Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, is born, who carries on the line of David. And the last step in our sort of shady puzzle is that Shlomo, as we discussed a couple sessions ago in the Queens series, has over 1,000 wives, yet his progenitor is Rechavam, who comes from Naamah, who is from Ammon, the other daughter of Lot. So before we can build the puzzle of the Jewish people, and I'm going to go back to our family tree here for a moment. I'm going to bring it up here together in the share screen. We have a filtering process. Now, this family tree that I had, unfortunately, does not start with Terach. Really, I should have had to start with Terach. Terach is the father of Abraham, Lot, and Sarah. And I'm sorry, the father of Abraham, the grandfather of Lot and Sarah. So we see there's a filtering process here, that Abraham marries Sarah. They have Yitzchak, and then Yitzchak marries Rivka, who's also from that family, who's from the other brother, and then Rachel and Leah are also from that family. So we see there's a filtering process with the patriarchs, taking what was good out of Terach. But before we can build the Davidic line, the Messianic line, we got to come back to that family and take this little bit out of Lot through Moab, through Ruth, and this little bit out of Lot through Ammon, through Naamah, who marries King Solomon. And that builds us our Davidic line. So it is quite a soap opera, to say the least, when we look at the Messianic line. But the big question, I gave you the what of the soap opera. I gave you the whole soap opera. But as Jews, we don't only ask what, we also ask why. So why is it that the Almighty in his divine wisdom, when he makes the family of the Jewish people, when he makes the family of Mashiach, the family of the king of Israel, David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayom, this is the king of Israel, the family of the king of Israel forever. Why is it such a murky situation? Why is it such a shady situation where literally we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 relationships that are questionable? Why? So there's 2 answers that I'll give you. Number one is that we see through this process the quintessential essence of what it means to be a Jew in 2 ways. Number one is that when the Almighty created the world, and this is what the Kabbalists teach, what the Arizal teaches, when the Almighty created the world, he tried to bring his presence into the world, the Shekhinah, the presence of the Almighty into the world, and it couldn't fit, so to speak, into the world, so it exploded, and sparks of God's presence went all over the world. And the job of the Jewish people, before we can bring the world to the fruition, is to travel all around the world and bring out those sparks. And that is also true in building the Davidic family, the Messianic family, that we had to go and bring the sparks completely out of Terach. Whatever was good Terach, we had to bring through Abraham, through Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, Moab, Ammon, through those two, we had to get it all together to be able to bring all the sparks together to put together the Messianic family, because that's what we as Jews do. We bring the sparks of holiness from wherever they lie, and we bring them together to do what we need to do as Jews. But then there's another lesson about the essence of what it means to be a Jew that we see from this situation. When you look at the Mashiach, the Messiah, coming from such a shady lineage, from such a shady background, it teaches us the ultimate lesson of being a Jew. And we're going to see this a lot more next week's session when we talk about the Roman converts, that Judaism is a meritocracy, not an aristocracy. In other words, yes, there are certain jobs in the Jewish world, like the Kohen and like the king, that are aristocratic, but there are many jobs that are not. And there's a whole discussion in the Talmud that someone who can be of we'll call it shady pedigree can still reach the highest of heights as a Jew by becoming a scholar and a righteous person, even though they have their shady pedigree. The moms we mentioned before can be respected more than the high priest if they become a Torah scholar and a righteous person. Because as Jews, we believe in a meritocracy, not an aristocracy. And therefore, any Jew, no matter what their background is, no matter how shady it is, no matter how many skeletons in the closet they have, they can become David HaMelech. They can become the Mashiach. They can become the Messiah. And that's the lesson we learn from the family of David HaMelech, from the family of King David, that no matter where we come from, we can reach the highest of heights. And one last lesson we see from here, that there's a concept that we have that's called bribing the Satan that our sages use. Now, bribing the Satan for you and me works like this. I have a trick that I do every year on the day before Shavuos. So on Shavuos, we have the custom of staying up all night learning Torah. And inevitably, when I try to take a nap on Erev Shavuos to prepare for that, inevitably, I can't fall asleep. Now, I'm the type of guy who never has a problem falling asleep, never when at night or when I occasionally get to take a nap. I never have a problem falling asleep, except the day before Shavuos when I want to get a good nap in, so I stay up all night learning. Why? Because my evil inclination goes after me and won't let me sleep. So what do? I pit my evil inclination against my evil inclination. I go lie down in bed, and I take a nice Jewish book to bed with me and start learning in bed. Because then the Yitzhar is going to get each other. Because like anytime when I sit down to read a good Jewish book and do a little learning of Torah, what's the Yitzhar, the evil inclination, do? It makes me want to fall asleep. But here he wants me to stay up. So one of them will win. Either I'll get to learn a little more or I'll fall asleep. But that's called pitting the Yetzer Hara against itself or bribing the Yetzer Hara. Another concept of this is like somebody who doesn't want to indulge in too much cake. You say, okay, you know what? I'll have a piece of cake after I run a mile. Or I'll go on vacation after I X, Y, and Z. That's called pitting the Yetzer Hara against itself, pitting the evil inclination against itself. And that's essentially the concept over here. That when the Almighty is able to paint Jewish history to look so scandalous and so shady, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, can look at this and say, oh, good, the world's playing out exactly as I want it to play out. We have incest, we have prostitutes, we have like 80-year-old men with 40-year-old men. Oh, by the way, back to Bathsheba for a minute. I mentioned she was 3 when she marries Uriah. She's 5 when she marries David, and David is 58. Yes, 58. So we were a 58-year-old grandfather with a 5-year-old girl. Like, we had scandal all around. So the evil inclination can say, yes, I'm getting exactly what I want out of the world. And he puts his guard down. And when he puts his guard down, that's when we can slip in and do exactly what we want and build the family of the Messiah. And that's what we see from the family of Ruth. A lot of interesting stuff going on there. Not only conversion, but we got it all in this story. And we see that that's the ultimate lesson that comes out of it. That through this family tree, we learn that as a Jew, we bring out sparks of holiness wherever they lie. As a Jew, we believe in meritocracy and not aristocracy. As a Jew, sometimes we have to bribe the evil inclination, to bribe the Satan, to pit the Satan against each other so that we can get on top and do the good in this world. Thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions, comments, concerns, good jokes, bad jokes? So I see here a question. What was the Talmudic reference again? 4b, right? So that's talking about, that's Pesachim 119a. It's talking about Hallel. Then in Hallel, there's four verses we say. Odechai ki nisan bat tehili Yeshua, avamos habonim hasaresh pina, meis Hashem ha'izah zos ha'ilaz benenu, zel yom Hashem negilav nis mechavo. These are ones I like to sing in shul, by the way. Like, they're fun singing ones. But, and that's talking about the day that David was anointed. That's what that reference was. Brian, what's up with that? Yeah, it's crazy. Crazy family situation over there. And learning in bed. Yeah, Mikhail, you like that idea? Yeah, it works. Okay, and by the way, feel free to unmute yourselves. You don't have to only type questions in. You can unmute yourselves and chime in with any questions if anybody's got. Well, okay then. So I want to thank you all for participating with us tonight. It's been a lot of fun being able to give over days of our lives. I mean, days of King David. I mean, whatever it is, the Messianic family here. We're going to continue next week here with our series on true religion, righteous converts. We'll be up to series lecture number 3 over here, which will be the scholars of Rome, Shemaiah of Talyon and Unclus. We're going to talk about a time period of mass conversion to Judaism, and it's not a time when you think there would have been mass conversion. So that'll be our discussion for next week. Tune in 8 o'clock right here on Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, wherever you're looking for it, or you can catch it afterwards on TorahAnytime.com. I thank you all for coming. I thank you for listening, and feel free to send your questions to me later if you have any. Everyone have a great evening, a Freilich and Chanukah, and a good Chodesh, a good Rosh Chodesh, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.